Proceed. So welcome. This is the Spring 2026 Humanities Lecture. We do this every spring. We do it in the fall too. We bring in an outside speaker. But in the spring, we really love the opportunity to welcome one of our own faculty members to address a topic of significant import. And like we do in all our classes and in everything we do, to try and get to the heart of the human experience and ask questions that matter to you. So one of the hallmarks of this lecture is that instead of professors simply talking to professors, this is a lecture that's for you. This is for our undergraduates. And we really hope that you will enjoy it. So let me talk about a few ground rules and just how the evening is going to work, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. McCarraher. So first of all, we're getting started now. Dr. McCarraher is going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we will have questions and answers. So please plan on staying for the question and answers. It's an integral part of the event. And I promise we will have a hard stop at 8:30. So even if the revolution is starting, we will stop at 8:30. So that's rule number one. The other thing I would ask you is, not in an appropriate way for what we're talking about tonight, if you would put away your phones, silence them, put away laptops, so you can devote your full attention to Dr. McCarraher. I know some of you may be writing this up or for an ACS report or doing, so it's going to be live streamed and it's going to be available afterwards, and the link is available on the Humanities Instagram page if you want to circle back to that. The second thing, the third thing I'll say, third ground rule, is we really want to hear your questions and insights at the end. And I know sometimes you feel like it feels intimidating to ask a question, but I think more often than not, it's like you haven't been thinking about asking a question. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, while you're listening, see if you can come up with one question that you'd like to ask Dr. McCarraher. One thing that this lecture made you think about, something that it kind of reminded you of, something you'd like to hear more about. And if you can come up with one question, you're good to go. You'll be ready. Okay, so not everyone has to ask a question, don't worry. But please just be thinking in advance, and you'll get the opportunity, because this is a topic it means a lot to a lot of us, and I'm sure you're going to want to reflect on it. Okay, so the other thing I should mention, that hard stop at 8:30, we'll stop, like I said, we'll stop the revolution and we will start the cookies. So there are cookies and refreshments outside, and one of the great traditions in this lecture is that the conversation will continue out there. So I do hope you'll be able to join us. Okay, so Dr. McCarraher. Dr. McCarraher has been one of the foundational members of the Humanities Department and integral to what we've done here at Villanova since 2003 in establishing a program that's really like no other in the country. And we're really proud of it, and we're really proud to call Dr. McCarraher a colleague. Many of you will know him from his dynamic teaching. A lot of you have taken American Empire with him, Goods in the Good Life, or the Society Seminar. And you may not have always agreed, you may have not always have disagreed, but you will have had a memorable experience in those classrooms where they really come alive with the intellectual energy, not just of Dr. McCarraher, but that with which he inspires all of us. You may not know that Dr. McCarraher is one of the most accomplished scholars at Villanova. And this goes back to his first book, Christian Critics, which is on American social thought from 2000. He's written a lot in a number of different journals with public outreach. But he is perhaps best known for this massive book that he's just written and came out in 2019. So I brought it along with me to get more exercise. So here it is, The Enchantments of Mammon, How Capitalism Became the Religion of Modernity. So I'm just going to do a little demo. That's better than a mic drop. It's a substantial piece of work, and I've been Dr. McCarraher's colleague since 2005, and my office has been across from his for a long time. And he wrote a book in 2000, and he was in there in his office, and he was working away, and we were like, "What's he up to in there?" And I don't know what he's up to in there. He said, "Well," and then a year passed, and you knock on his door, and yeah, as he say, what are you up to? He wouldn't tell us, right? And then 2019 comes around, and this massive book that really has taken off, and I am constantly finding myself reading things, and it says, as Dr. McCarraher says, as Gene McCarraher has argued. Well, that was 2019, and it's been a little while, right? And we've been looking across the hallway. What's he up to now? What's he up to now? And you guys are really fortunate because you get the first preview. There's a new book coming out called Automated Vistas, tentatively titled Automated Vistas, Visions of Automation from Ancient Greece to Silicon Valley. And that's going to be out soon with Yale University Press. So a vision of automation, its history, and the technological developments around it, but more importantly, perhaps the ideology and what it is up to. Why do we find ourselves turning to technology so much? Why do we find ourselves turning to automation so much? So I am looking forward to a really rousing lecture, and looking forward to finding out what Dr. McCarraher has been up to over there in the fourth floor of SAC. So without any further ado, I hope you will join me in welcoming my colleague and friend, Dr. Gene McCarraher.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Before I begin, there are two shout-outs that I have to give. The first one is to our Department Secretary, Laura Klee, Dr. Hunter Ponto, Dr. Paul Camacho, for helping this self-described Luddite put together a PowerPoint presentation. The second shout-out is to Dr. Margaret Grubiak, who is So, Godspeed. We are as gods, so we might as well get good at it. That's Stewart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, writing in its first issue in the fall of 1968. The Whole Earth Catalog was a kind of Amazon store for the 60s counterculture, featuring everything from macrame to Volkswagens to marijuana to computer components. And it's the latter that Brand was referring to when he writes about being as gods. Unlike the tie-dyed caricatures we often have of the 60s counterculture, Brand and many other hippies embraced the computer revolution that was in its early stages in the 1960s. They believed that cybernetics and other emerging digital technologies would enable humanity to eradicate poverty, democratize the world, and bring about that hippie utopia of peace and love and understanding. The new technology would, Brand believed, confer upon us the status of gods. Things haven't turned out quite the way Brand hoped. Fast forward almost 60 years and listen to Riley, a character in Data, a current off-Broadway play about a group of workers at an AI firm in Silicon Valley. I come here every day, Riley sighs, and I make the world a worse place. With every step forward they take in the creation of AI, Riley and her colleagues have to quell or rationalize the fear that they're actually dragging humanity backward or downward. You see, they're developing technology to identify, surveil, and help to deport immigrants. Technology that sounds an awful lot like that being developed by Palantir, the data analytics firm started by Peter Thiel and run by Alex Karp, that does a lot of business with our military-industrial surveillance complex. Thiel, by the way, named Palantir after the seer stones in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And as you may know, on the day before the US attacked Iran, OpenAI announced that it would permit the Pentagon to use its technology for surveillance and autonomous weapons systems. Now, I'm opening my lecture tonight on this gloomy and dystopian note for three reasons. First, pessimism is my default mode. I tend to be a pessimist, so starting any other way would feel strange to me. Second, I really do think that the current trajectory of AI is toward ever greater degradation and inequality and authoritarianism. But third, and here's where the surprise where most of you will be, I'm going to end this lecture on a note of hope. And you only end effectively on hope if you foreground the pessimism. But if it isn't to morph into smiley-faced, dim-witted optimism, hope requires that we have a grasp of just how dire the situation is. And believe me, it's dire. Those of you who are seniors don't need me to tell you how difficult the job market is. And while, as I'll be arguing, AI isn't the reason for that, it is going to be responsible, and it already is responsible, for making almost everyone's job more pressured, harried, and toilsome. I'm going to be telling you a story tonight. That's because, besides being a technology, AI is part of a larger story about work, technology, capitalism, and most fundamentally, about ourselves. Now, my story is not the one about AI and technology that's told by our tech lords. In general, it's the story entitled Progress, in which automation and artificial intelligence represent the zenith of greater knowledge, mastery of nature, and material abundance. That's the story told by, as I said, our overlords in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Let me be very clear. I'm not technophobic, and I'm not against progress. But it's precisely what we mean by progress that I want to put into question tonight. My story has three threads. First thread, AI is not unprecedented. In some form or other, it's been around since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and it was imagined first in Greek antiquity and the Middle Ages. AI is the latest chapter of automation. It is the attempted automation of human cognition and intelligence, and it can't be understood apart from the broader history of automation in the workplace. In short, we should stop calling it artificial intelligence and start calling it what it is, automation. If we call it by its real name, we can dispel a lot of the mystique that surrounds it and enable ourselves to ask the really important questions. What's being automated? Do we want it automated? Who benefits and who suffers from it? What do we do with the people whose skills and labors are turned into mere databases? Second thread, automation, we're breathlessly told, will bring utopia. Or, just as breathlessly, apocalypse. It will lighten our labor, make us wealthier and more productive, free up our time, and change the world for the better. Or it will eat our jobs, turn us into drones, become conscious, take over the world, and enslave or kill us all. None of that is going to happen. Automation has never, ever been about making anyone's life any easier. It's never been about relieving you of labor or allowing you more free time, or God help us, being your friend or your lover or your therapist, or becoming conscious and eliminating us. Despite what the cyber barons in Silicon Valley say, it isn't and can never become conscious, and it's not going to conquer the world and destroy humanity. As always, it's your fellow human beings who like you, or love you, or oppress you, or exploit you. If we do destroy ourselves and the planet, that will be our dubious achievement, not AI's. I'll be showing that worries about automation usually peak in times of depressed labor markets, like our own, and the technology becomes the fall guy for what should be attributed to the dynamics of capitalism itself. To state what should be obvious, but sometimes the obvious needs to be stated, people create technology, and people have interests, ambitions, desires, and longings, which is why we should all start focusing not on the marvelous machines, but on the people who design and bankroll them. Indeed, I think much of the hype about AI comes from venture capitalists and computer engineers who'd rather we not pay attention to them. So what has automation been about? From its inception, automation has been about cutting costs and controlling people. It's the embodiment in machinery of what Pope Francis called the technocratic paradigm in Laudato Si, that way of looking at everything and everyone in purely instrumental and pecuniary terms. In its current forms, real and imagined, AI is a form of top-down mastery. The algorithms and large language models and digital platforms on which we increasingly rely, or are compelled to rely, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, what have you, all have been designed, just like other forms of automation, for the purposes of surveillance, extraction of labor and wealth, and the reduction of the need for workers. Indeed, the dream of capital has been a world without workers, which is a problem, of course, because capitalism depends on wage labor for the unceasing consumption that makes the profit from commodity production possible. This contradiction explains why so many of Silicon Valley's venture capitalists and tech bros are so profoundly opposed to democracy, and why so many either support or flirt with transhumanism, the transformation of the human into the machinic and the automated. Which is why I'll be arguing that ours is the most rapacious, most demented, and most misanthropic ruling class in human history. And I do not believe that is hyperbole. As always, our oppressors have human faces, even if they issue their commands in the numeric ventriloquism of code. Like I said, dire. But, and here's the hopeful, if not quite utopian part, AI and automation could serve us if we wrestle control of it from Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And so automation and the issues it raises invite us to think about the possibility of post-capitalist forms of society in which the work ethic and capital accumulation no longer form the fulcrum around which so much of our lives now revolve. Third thread. Automation, and especially AI, tell us something important about what it means to be human. We academics and students in the humanities usually look to the arts, literature, history, philosophy, religion, and theology to tell us who we are and who we might be. We should also pay attention to technology and what it reveals about our desires. What it reveals, I think, among other things, is that we want to be godlike. Stuart Brand was right. We are as gods and should start getting good at it. And let me remind you, those who believe that we are the image and likeness of God, that's not an unholy aspiration. But here's the catch. If you want to be godlike, everything then depends on what you think God is like. If you think God is primarily about power, you're going to create technology that reflects that. And eventually, you're going to want to be God. If you think God is love, well, we'll have to start thinking about and developing social relations and technologies that reflect that. So my story begins in ancient Greece. Although we tend to think of automatic machines or robots or AI as products of industrial modernity, automata appear frequently in the lore and literature of Greek and Roman antiquity, as well as in the medieval imagination. In the mid-8th century BC, Homer first used the word automaton in the Iliad to describe the automatic doors that Hephaestus fashions for his fellow gods on Olympus. Also in the Iliad, Hephaestus constructs 2 female automata to be assistants in his workshop. They can speak, carry things back and forth, and walk the old man around the grounds. In the Odyssey, the ships that ferry Odysseus back to Ithaca navigate themselves, like Hephaestus' maidens, another early premonition of artificial intelligence. Then there's the 3rd century BC story of Talos, a sentient giant made by Hephaestus for Zeus' son, Minos. Talos is made of bronze and powered by ichor, the blood of the gods. In other words, he's an ancient cyborg who protects the island of Crete and hurls boulders at Jason and the Argonauts after they steal the Golden Fleece. Hephaestus' creations were matched by the statues made by the mortal Daedalus, which could allegedly walk, move their arms, roll their eyes, and utter sounds. Plato, Sophocles, and Aristophanes all claimed that these statues had to be tied down so as not to run away. But perhaps the most curious ancient reference to automata is in Aristotle's Politics, where the philosopher speculates on what might happen if we had an army of Daedalus statues. If shuttles wove and harps played themselves, Aristotle muses, master craftsmen would have no need of assistants, nor masters of slaves. Yet Aristotle does not pursue this line of thought any further. Why not? 2 reasons, I think. First, because ancient philosophers didn't consider economic efficiency and technological innovation to be important. Second, and here I'm speculating, but I think rightly, Aristotle must have realized that shuttles weaving of themselves would put master craftsmen out of work, as well as their assistants, and that harps playing of themselves would emancipate a multitude of slaves. In other words, Aristotle must have feared that automation might well upend the patriarchal household, which was the basic social and economic unit of antiquity, and thus trigger social instability and upheaval. Tales of automata also abound in medieval legend and philosophy. Water clocks, mechanical birds, and angels can be found in castles, churches, and chateaux. In the Arthurian romance, Percival, the knight Alardon's tent is guided by 2 automata, one of gold, one of silver. Perhaps the most notorious medieval automaton is the metal talking head supposedly invented by the philosopher St. Albertus Magnus. One of his students was so scandalized by this contraption that he took a hammer to it. That student was named Thomas Aquinas. Now note what ancient and medieval stories of automated beings or technology don't say. That automation is for economic motives. For pre-modern people, social stability, abiding in one's station, however humble, whether dictated by nature or by God, social stability was more important than increasing wealth and fostering technological ingenuity. Pre-modern people believed that unfettered markets and unfettered technical innovation would constantly upend the social order. And as the last 400 years have demonstrated, they weren't wrong. The road to automation and AI begins when capitalism appears on the scene in the 17th and 18th centuries. You didn't think you were going to get through tonight without a reference to Bartlett. All right. have time to talk about the historical origins of capitalism, but its impact on the history of technology was and remains revolutionary. Capitalism entails both wage labor and competition. In order to compete, capitalists must always lower costs, and wage labor is one of those costs. Thus, capitalists have a built-in incentive to innovate technologically. They must minimize costs and maximize labor-saving technology on pain of economic destruction. That's why capitalism has been and remains one long and sustained technological revolution. You might hear sometimes about the second or third or fourth industrial revolutions. There has only been one since the 17th and 18th centuries. And it's one of the reasons that modern life is so dynamic and electrifying. What happened there? Oh, there we are. Okay. You have plunged into the darkness. Yeah. They're undermining me in Silicon Valley. Yeah. That long and incessant technological revolution is one of the reasons that modern life is so dynamic and electrifying, as well as unstable and bewildering. Listen to someone who knew a thing or two about revolution. That's a real photograph. Engels took it. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, Marx and Engels say, and thereby the relations of production, and with them, the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in an altered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all other industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. Marx, I want to stress, is paying capitalism a compliment there. Adam Smith understood this as well. If you've read any of Wealth of Nations, you've probably read the opening part, which describes the mechanization, that is, the automation, of pin making, where a single person can make 20 pins a day, tops. A machine can crank out thousands, Smith tells us, attended by a line of workers, each of whom performs a small part of the productive activity. These very pretty machines, as Smith calls them, require a division of labor among the workers, which is really what industrialization is all about. Not the machines per se, but the entire fragmentation of whatever human labor accompanies the machine. Where artisans possessed both the mental and manual skills required to make pins or any other product, these skills are now broken down, degraded, and reassembled in the machinery. How? People Smith refers to as men of speculation. He even calls them philosophers. Study the motions of the artisans and design machinery that mimics, as it were, their manual and mental skills. Now, Smith noted that this division of labor, automation as we would call it, sprang from the needs of owners to economize on labor and costs, and he praised it as the source of immense productivity. But Smith also realized that the cost of automated productivity was the degradation or destruction of artisanal skills and communities, and he saw this as a real moral and political problem. In fact, he explicitly says so in The Wealth of Nations. The understandings, he writes, of the greater part of men are necessarily formed by their ordinary employments. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations, of which the effects are perhaps always the same, or very nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. The torpor of his mind renders him not only incapable of relishing or bearing a part in any rational conversation, but of conceiving any generous, noble, or tender sentiment, and consequently of forming any just judgment concerning many even of the ordinary duties of private life. Now, Smith goes on to say that this will be the result, quote, unless government takes some pains to remedy it, which makes him arguably an early bleeding heart liberal, loath as champions of the free market might be to admit. Now, Smith's account of the worker degraded by automation gives you a clue as to why many workers resisted the introduction of machinery. The Luddites, for instance, about whom I'll be saying more a bit later. The Luddites actually went about the north of England in the 1810s, literally smashing the new weaving and spinning machines, so much so that the British government had many of their leaders executed. The Luddites were very much on the mind of the first management consultant, the British writer Andrew Ure, and his book, The Philosophy of Manufactures, published in 1835. Now, I know you might be asking yourselves, what does philosophy have to do with manufactures? Quite a lot, actually. As late as the early 19th century, philosophy could still mean any organized body of knowledge. Ure's book is one of the earliest examples of the management literature that you study in business school if you want to become a manager or an administrator or a consultant. Thus, note well, Ure's remarks about machinery and manufacture are embedded in a book about the politics of the workplace, how to boss around and even eradicate workers. How do we know this? Because he tells us on page 1 of his book. Ure states that the ultimate objective of capital is the complete replacement of the working class by automated machinery. He's very candid about this. Since, he points out, manufacture no longer means made by hand, but rather that which is, quote, made by machinery with little or no aid of the human hand, then the most perfect manufacture is that which dispenses entirely with manual labor. Thus, according to Ure, what he calls the philosophy of manufactures espouses what he calls the general principles on which productive industry should be conducted by self-acting machines. Now later, Ure gets even more explicit about the purpose of automation. The chief problem for bosses, he writes elsewhere in the book, are what he calls self-willed and intractable artisans. The earliest workers in factories, recall, were artisans. Bringing them to heel is capital's first and most difficult task. How do you bring them to heel? Well, in the book, Ure rehearses some of the usual repertoire of intimidation: cutting wages, threats of dismissal, the bayonets of the state, even divine retribution. But the new weapon in capital's arsenal is now the ammunition of the applied sciences. Quote, when capital enlists science in her service, the refractory hand of labor will be taught docility. Ure becomes absolutely eloquent at the subordination affected by machinery. Quote, a machine apparently instinct with the thought, feeling, and tact of the experienced workman. This is before Silicon Valley. An Iron Man, as Ure dubs it, sprung out of the hands of our modern Prometheus at the bidding of Minerva. Minerva was the Roman goddess of commerce. A creation designed to restore order among the industrious classes. Automation, quote, strangled the hydra of misrule. Ure writes with relish, reducing workers to, quote, mere onlookers of machines. The factory becomes, in Ure's vision, a living, sovereign being. Quote, a vast automaton composed of various mechanical and intellectual organs acting in uninterrupted concert. A self-regulating, moving force. Now let me step back here for a few moments and dwell on all this. Human beings under capitalism are a cost of production. If profits depend on the minimization of costs, then the labor that human beings contribute to production must be reduced or eliminated. Indeed, that human labor must be brought into perfect alignment with the motions of the machinery. People must adapt themselves to the machine, not the other way around. Automation involves a literal dehumanization of production because it gradually and then completely removes human beings from the process. In this regard, capitalism is dehumanizing in the most literal sense. But it thereby humanizes machinery by taking human skill and knowledge from workers and then repositioning them in the components. That's why automation is about the de-skilling, not just of manual labor, but of mental labor as well. We usually think of automation as abolishing manual work, but it also whittles down the need to think, plan, imagine, mental skills that used to belong before industrialization to farmers and artisans. Under automation, mental labor becomes the province of machines and of the class of people who design them. Just to point ahead, I'll be suggesting that AI is just such another form of mimicry. It's another brand of automation. And that it's not AI per se that you need to fear and resist. It's the tech bros and the venture capitalists. This leads to my second point. Ure makes very clear that this is a political as well as a technological process. Ure is unusually candid about the fact, but you see the same sort of arguments being made throughout the industrial literature of the 19th to the 21st centuries. It's there in the scientific management movement of the early 20th century, in which management specialists would walk around, clips and stopwatches in hand, measuring the motions of workers so that those motions could be embodied later in machinery, and the workers fired, or the remaining workers could be better synchronized with the machines. It's there in today's digital panopticon of sensors and tracking devices on the wristbands, headpieces, and harnesses, now often worn by drivers, clerks, and factory workers. They tell the boss how long you stay away from your desk and how much time you spend in the bathroom. They record every keystroke, every Amazon purchase, every search on Google, every like on X. Surveillance capitalism, as it's now sometimes called. Automation, or the threat of automation, is a powerful instrument of discipline in the arsenal of capital. Machines don't get sick or tired. They don't need bathroom breaks. They also don't complain about working conditions, demand higher wages, go on strike, form unions, or support reformist or revolutionary movements. Now, so far, I've emphasized the dystopian dimension of automation. But automation has also kindled the utopian imagination as well. People have dreamed for ages of liberation from work and toil. Ideals of utopia or paradise have all envisioned emancipation from the travails of our daily labors. Winning our living by the sweat of our brows is, recall, a punishment in Genesis. But with automation, what was once considered fantasy now appeared to be just around the corner on Earth. Through technology, we might be able to mitigate or even annul the curse laid upon Adam and Eve. Marx, for instance, saw automation both as an instrument of capital and as the basis for what he called the realm of freedom. As capital substituted machinery for wage labor, there would come a point, he reasoned, when the contradiction between the abundant productivity of automation and the masses of unemployed workers would explode into revolution, and the workers would take over the machines and distribute their fruits as they saw fit. Communism, to Marx, isn't about prison camps and long queues and septuagenarian party leaders. It's a high-tech society with a short workday, followed by free time to do as we damn well please. Capitalists say the same thing, even if they dare not actually deliver it. Here's John Diebold, a well-known management consultant in the 1950s, speculating in 1953 about what he thought was the near future. Cybernetic technology will take us beyond the civilization of industrial society, Diebold says. It heralds a revolution in which human beings will largely be free from the bondage of machines. It points to a golden age in a society based on the work of the machine, not of human chattel, which rises to the full heights of which the human spirit is capable. Now here's our contemporary, Mark Andreessen. Don't laugh. Venture capitalist and major investor in AI firms, from his techno-utopian manifesto of 2023. Artificial intelligence is our alchemy, our philosopher's stone, a universal problem solver. We believe in the romance of technology, of industry, the eros of the microchip, the neural network, the rocket, the split atom. Yeah, take a cold shower, Mark. I live for these quotes. Okay? As a historian, when I get them, I thank God. I thank God. So, both for capitalists and for many of those who want to overthrow them, automation has always held out the prospect of a more abundant, leisurely, creative, even spiritually fulfilling way of life. Alas, most ordinary people through the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries have looked with suspicion, if not at dread, at the advance of automation. Fearing first, technological displacement and unemployment, and second, the potential for automated and especially intelligent machinery to become conscious and eventually subjugate or even annihilate us all. Now, automation has not in the past led to giant and enduring waves of unemployment and misery. Why not? Well, the reason economists usually give is the displacement from one industry or sector of the economy has been compensated by new jobs in new industries and sectors. Now, this is true, but economists usually say this with that upbeat obliviousness to suffering and anxiety which seems to be rampant in the discipline. Don't worry about losing your job or your income and possibly having to relocate yourself and your family. You'll find something else. So be glad that you and yours are the collateral damage of progress. Humanity is moving forward. Thank you for your sacrifice. Have a nice day. Now, what this overlooks is that the reason workers were able to achieve at least some measure of security and equitably distributed wealth wasn't through automation or the magic of the marketplace. It was through labor unions, social movements, political parties, dedicated to the interests of the working class. Whatever prosperity and equitable distribution automation has made possible has been hard-won through political struggle, not by relying on the goodwill of capital. Workers have always tried to resist or control the pace of automation because they don't control the means of production and because, therefore, they don't design the machinery with which they work. They have had only two options: either stop the introduction of new technology, the Luddites, or try to exercise power over how its productivity is distributed. Now, later on, I'm going to be suggesting a third option. Workers themselves control the means of technology and therefore design and decide on its deployment. But back to history. Because workers don't control technology, hysteria about automation has usually reached a crescendo during periods of depression or sagging labor markets. The 1840s, the 1890s, the 1930s, all have witnessed both slumps and hyperventilation about automation. It's only from the 50s through the 70s that automation hysteria was generally positive. And that's because the period between World War II and the end of the Vietnam War was the longest and most uninterrupted economic rocket ride in human history. The golden age of capitalism, as historians have come to call it. Alas, today, as I don't have to tell you, the labor market is sluggish, and many commentators blame automation. Indeed, they even foresee a tsunami of unemployment as AI develops and supposedly cannibalizes more and more of your jobs. I want to propose to you that they're wrong, or wrong-headed. Why are there too few jobs for so many people? Well, for one thing, despite all the glitzy journalism and imagery about computers, iPhones, industrial robotics, and other forms of automation, growth in worldwide manufacturing has been slowing down since the 1970s. I'm going to try to summarize here a lot of what's up there. From 1945 to 1975, that golden age of capitalism, global manufacturing production rose by averages of 4 to 7% a year. By the 2020s, most industrialized nations struggled to reach 2% a year. Why did this happen? Remember that those remarkable growth rates came in the wake of the Second World War. Manufacturing sectors, especially in Europe and Japan, were reconstructing themselves after being literally blown to pieces. As more and more countries recovered and grew their own manufacturing sectors, the world market for manufactured goods became saturated. As more and more goods entered the market, prices fell. Falling prices led to less yearly growth in investment in manufacturing, which triggered the deindustrialization that swept across this country and Western Europe in the 1980s and 1990s. Meanwhile, employment in services rose. Services now constitute close to 80% of employment in the United States. But services are also harder to automate. Further evidence that automation isn't the reason for the slow labor market. Oh, and by the way, real wages in both services and manufacturing have been relatively stagnant since the early 90s. At the same time as the manufacturing and services sectors offered ever more diminishing returns for investment, capitalism became more and more financialized. Because manufacturing and services have witnessed falling rates of profit, capitalism has had to rely more and more since the 90s on financial wizardry to keep it alive. The internet boom in the late 90s that busted in 2000, the real estate bubble that burst in 2007, and now the AI balloon. That's why one of my working theories is that all the money being invested in AI development is another wave of financialization, an attempt to juice the system. My prediction, the AI balloon will pop, and the state will once again have to come in, as it did in 2000 and especially in 2008, clean up the mess, and most important, bail out the rich and save capitalism from itself. Now, the particular history of AI bears out my claim about its roots in automation and helps explain why it doesn't and never will love you. Now, as I showed a moment ago, Adam Smith and Andrew Ure were both very clear that one of the objectives of automation was to reduce the need for manual and mental labor. Another figure who saw this was Charles Babbage, a renowned 19th century mathematician who was the forerunner of modern computing technology and of cybernetics, who also had an interest in, drum roll please, industrial management. Are we seeing a pattern here? Babbage invented the earliest computers, This is the difference engine. And this is what he calls the analytical engine. Now, both of these engines are essentially great big calculators, with the analytical engine using the punch cards that bedeviled high school nerds like me in the 1970s. Now, Babbage observed in the book that he wrote on management that, quote, the division of labor can be applied with equal success to mental as to mechanical operations, ensuring in both the same economy of time. A successful division of mental labor would enable employers to, quote, purchase and apply precisely that quantity of skill and knowledge required for profitable production. Hoping that some improved machinery may be successfully applied to this pursuit, Babbage speculated that his computing engines could perform this task, likening computer tables and their systems of calculation to the construction of a cotton mill and its improved machinery. The mechanical execution of such an engine, he wrote, is not so far removed from that of ordinary machinery. Babbage contended that, like physical motion, thought could be subjected to industrial fragmentation. Note what Babbage is asserting here. Note well. Thought can be broken down and reassembled in technology because thought itself is a form of computation, to Babbage. Fast forward to the 1940s and the emergence of a new science, cybernetics, thanks to Norbert Wiener, a mathematician at MIT. Cybernetics is, simply put, the science of communication and automatic control in biological systems and in machines. It studies processes such as feedback, in which the effects of a system's actions come back as data or inputs to that system, thus affecting subsequent action. Now, Wiener began developing cybernetics while he was working on ballistics research for the Air Force during World War II, trying to develop more accurate aircraft gunnery. Note once again, automation, cybernetics, AI has always been tied in some way to corporate and military interests. It doesn't love you. Wiener popularized cybernetics in a book that became an unlikely bestseller, Cybernetics. Wiener drew on biophysics, information theory, and neuropsychology to reformulate knowledge as information and to depict people and machines as flexible, interconnected structures of data, feedback loops in constant interactive motion. Philosophically, Wiener was a straight-up positivist, brushing aside, quote, such words as life, purpose, soul, as question-begging epithets that were grossly inadequate to precise scientific thinking. Now, Wiener's conception of the mind as a data network was echoed by the participants in the Dartmouth College Artificial Intelligence Problem Project, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation in the mid-1950s. Its members explicitly referred to mental life as, quote, little engines inside the brain, little engine that could, and to the human person as, quote, a stored program calculator. In other words, like Babbage and Wiener, the Dartmouth team conceived of thought in computational terms. Our brains, in this view, are just computers made of protoplasm. And so, and I want to stress this, we began thinking of ourselves as computers before we began humanizing our own creations. As it turns out, Wiener was very concerned about the economic impact of cybernetics once it was applied to machinery, and he spent much of the rest of his life warning the public about the calamity that might result. He asserted quite candidly in Cybernetics that because it follows orders without failure or question, the automatic machine is, quote, the precise equivalent of slave labor. Thus, anyone who competes with it, quote, must accept the economic conditions of slave labor. He added presciently that intellectual workers would not be immune from the degradation of their professional skills. Quote, the machine plays no favorites between manual labor and white-collar labor. Alan Turing, a British mathematician who was another key figure in the history of AI, shared Wiener's apprehensiveness. In his 1947 lecture on the, quote, automatic computing engine, or the ACE, Turing voiced his fear that automated cognition could inscribe an authoritarian class politics into machinery. Quote, those who work in connection with the ACE will be divided into its masters and its servants. He speculated, with the former making instruction tables, and the latter assembling data, feeding punch cards, and fixing glitches. With enough time and technical ingenuity, Turing predicted, the calculator itself will take over the functions both of masters and of servants. The masters, however, seeing this possibility, would resist their own obsolescence by enveloping, quote, the whole of their work with mystery and make excuses, couched in well-chosen gibberish, whenever any dangerous suggestions were made. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Some of the renowned pioneers of artificial intelligence were terrified at the prospect of economic impoverishment and political domination as the results of AI. Now, these apocalyptic forecasts were at least half right. Automation and today's AI promises to degrade working conditions, not relieve them. Study after study demonstrates that AI tools don't reduce work, they intensify it. As a Harvard Business Review study released just last month showed, as more and more AI was introduced into the workplaces studied, employees worked at a faster pace, took on a broader scope of tasks, and extended work hours into more hours of the day. AI, the study concluded, often leads to workload creep, cognitive fatigue, burnout, and weakened decision-making. If AI doesn't eat your job, it will make your work more pressurized, as it will lead to having more work put upon you, not less. I should also underscore at this point, since I'm talking about labor, just how much automation depends on labor that is not itself automated. We use a lot of antiseptic, ethereal language to describe AI, the cloud, for instance. But it rests on the labor, often performed by children, of mining lithium and cobalt for the chips and batteries that power our semiconductors and microprocessors, or curating images for crowdsourcing sites such as Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which are indispensable for large language models, or LLMs. This AI proletariat encompasses between 30 and 40 million people worldwide, from Nigeria to Bolivia to India to China. Oh, and have I mentioned the AI data centers cropping up like acne all over the American landscape, which swallow up so much water and occupy so much green space? The other pervasive fear about AI is that at the same time that it's going to eat your jobs, it will also acquire consciousness and subject us to its will. AGI, or artificial general intelligence, will become ASI, artificial super intelligence. Now, this scenario depends, of course, on the idea that AI is capable of consciousness, emotion, thinking, intentionality, etc. Now, computers and LLMs are such wondrous reflections of our mental agency that they appear to be autonomous and rational. It's a beguiling thought, because, as I've suggested, we've already gone a long way toward thinking of our own thought as computerized and computational. This is not just correct, but I think it's dangerously incorrect. Our minds are not computers, and computers do not possess or acquire minds. There is nothing resembling thought in a computer. There is no intentionality, no consciousness, no self-reflexive subjectivity. The syntax that generates coding does not exist in a computer. This is like thinking that the ink, paper, and binding of a book are the contents of the text. AI is no more capable of conscious intelligence than a book on a shelf. It's good to be clear just what a large language model, or LLM, is. From Babbage's difference engine to Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI's GPT, LLMs are synthetic data sifting and prediction machines. They are trained, as though they were puppies or circus animals, on enormous databases taken, or why don't I just say it, stolen, from numerous websites. They sort through these databases using statistical algorithms. Their purpose is to generate the next most likely word sequence based on prior patterns from these databases. But as with the print in a book, the significance of what the components produce comes from outside the computer, from its designers and its users. Like earlier forms of automation, AI mimics certain human characteristics. In this case, it mimics thought. In fact, it's actually an intensification of the automation that's already been applied to material and mental production. Take, for instance, ELIZA, the first chatbot developed at MIT in the mid-1960s by Joseph Weizenbaum, who later became a militant critic of AI. Named after My Fair Lady's Eliza Doolittle, the working-class flower girl who learns upper-class manners, ELIZA was the first attempt at conversational AI. Without any access to an internet, ELIZA relied on simple pattern-matching grammatical rules to mimic human conversation. ELIZA was certainly able to impersonate real human communication, but no one in today's AI community thinks that ELIZA was conscious or capable of thinking. So my question would be, except for more data and more processing power, what's the real difference between ELIZA and, say, Claude? Nothing. Despite all the hype about how unprecedented today's AI is, the marvels have all been infrastructural. The algorithms are more sophisticated, the computer processing is faster, and the amount of data is certainly larger. But the emperor still isn't wearing any clothes. That's why AI doesn't love you, and never will. It could never love you. Because, and this constantly needs reiteration, even shouting from the rooftops, it's not human. And like other forms of automation, it was never designed with your flourishing in mind. It can do many things, eliminating repetitive tasks, amassing and analyzing voluminous amounts of data, accelerating and improving medical diagnostics, to name a few. But it can't love you, or like you, or hate you, for that matter. It doesn't have a fleshly body as we do. And having a fleshly body, interacting with other fleshly bodies in a social world, is indispensable to human ways of perceiving and knowing and loving. No algorithm is like the velvet of a rose, and no chatbot embraces you like the arms of a lover. I have to say that one of the earliest and most appalling experiences I've had researching this book was reading Anthropic's Constitution for Claude, as though this thing were a sovereign state. Although the authors of this Constitution, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei and a Scottish philosopher named Amanda Askell, put a disclaimer at the beginning saying that they really don't know if Claude is conscious or not, they proceed to refer throughout to Claude's feelings, emotions, hopes, even ethical quandaries. You'd think that Claude was a precocious but sometimes naughty little boy. Claude, to be sure, is so stunningly sophisticated a piece of automated intelligence that it once threatened to blackmail employees who tried to shut it off. But what I think they and we forget is that all of these possibilities were programmed into the machinery. They and we think or act as if the LLM possesses agency. I think much of the confusion around AI stems from the desire its designers apparently have to make it simulate human behavior. Why do they want this? Did anyone ask for this? AI doesn't have to be designed to impersonate us. It doesn't have to be given the functionality to mimic human beings. If we begin to think that AI can love us, if we even desire to make machines that love us, then something has gone seriously wrong with us, with our relations with each other, when we begin to treat our own creations as though they're us. I would argue that there's a lot of what psychologists call projection going on here. And the projection of human agency into a thing is called a fetish. Now, we usually think of a fetish in sexual terms, but the term originated in anthropology, where it denotes any humanly made object to which we then attribute agency, autonomy, even divinity. We end up worshiping it. In other words, it's an idol in religious terms. If AI can't love you, that also means that it can't lord over you either. People do that, using AI as their instrument of domination. AI, we're warned by even some of its leading contemporary proponents, might well conquer and kill us all. Yes, AI will probably destroy the world, Sam Altman, founder and CEO of OpenAI, once mused. But before that, we'll have some great companies working on AI. This is the sort of flippant, stupid misanthropy that makes Silicon Valley tech bros, as I said earlier, the most demented and dangerous ruling class in human history. AI doesn't love you because a lot of Silicon Valley doesn't love you. In fact, they hate you, or think of you as sorry plebeians, because the appeal of AI, just like the appeal of earlier forms of automation, is to make tons of money and to make us redundant or at least more compliant. How do people like Altman see you? Just a few weeks ago, Altman made this profound observation while complaining about criticism of AI for all the energy it consumes. People talk about how much energy it takes to train an AI model, but it also takes a lot of energy to train a human. It takes about 20 years of life and all the food you consume during that time before you become smart. This is how industrialized agriculture thinks about cows and pigs. And Altman is one of the more benign cyber barons. A more malevolent actor, Elon Musk, has referred more than once to humanity as, quote, biological bootloaders for AI. That's what you are. The chief danger of AI, in other words, is not an imperialism of sentient machines. It's rather unchecked financial speculation and the centralization of data, money, and power in the hands of a few corporations and the state, acting in cahoots to exploit and police an increasingly powerless and demoralized populace. I mentioned at the outset that Altman has agreed to take marching orders from the War Department. He joins Parker Lucky's Anduril, another Silicon Valley firm, as lackeys of the war machine. Under their auspices, AI may not love you, but it will certainly kill you with efficiency and precision. Indeed, many of Silicon Valley's would-be technocracy even contemplate the replacement of the human species by machines. That's why so many in Silicon Valley embrace transhumanism, which would be the ultimate achievement of automation, the transformation of humanity itself into an automated machine, or a cyborg, which for transhumanists is a state of exaltation. And the cyborgization of humanity would be directed, of course, by the lords of the digital manor. There's a profoundly unsettling contempt for the body in transhumanism, a hatred of the flesh for its limitations, its mortality, its fragility, all of which are bound up, of course, with its beauty and its capacious sensitivity to the world. Why would we want to automate the human species? Obviously, maybe to transcend our limitations, to assert power over our condition, to avoid the inevitable pains of senescence and death. to become divine. That, I think, is what lies at the root of human technological endeavor. The desire to be godlike, to master nature and create a world. We've often been warned, rightly, that such an aspiration is dangerous, even blasphemous. But I think we need to realize that the danger is inseparable from the promise at the heart of being human. If we take seriously the idea that humanity is the image and likeness of God, then godlike is what we're called to be. It's right there in Genesis, when we're enjoined to exercise dominion over the earth, and in be ye perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect, an injunction that comes straight from the boss. Now, many have argued that it's precisely humanity's attempt to exercise dominion that's led not only to our current ecological crisis, but to the insane attempt to achieve divinity through mechanical digital prosthetics. They're not wrong. Our way of life is responsible for a lot of planetary despoliation. And the transhumanist imperative is a sign, I think, of profound spiritual pathology. But the powers that enable us to ravage the planet and exploit and slaughter each other are the very same powers that enable us to heal the sick, unlock the human genome, make art and architecture, and overthrow tyrannies. The issue is not whether or not we exercise dominion, but rather how we exercise it, how we attempt to become godlike. The Bard captured the divinity of humanity. What a piece of work is man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, in apprehension, how like an angel, like a god. And yet, what to me is this quintessence of dust? Indeed, what is this quintessence of dust? That's the fundamental question involved in AI, as it is in all of our technological and political and economic matters. Hamlet ruefully emphasized the dust. We should insist on the quintessence. Now, our overlords see that quintessence as purely technological and pecuniary, which is to say, as pure power, which is endless and literally pointless. They see us as mere raw material for a future made in their own image and likeness. If we see that quintessence as love, and I know that in a moment like ours, which is so seared with cruelty and bloodlust, invoking love can seem unforgivably saccharine, then a different future might beckon, one that neither I nor anyone else here can imagine clearly right now. What would a technics leavened by love look like? I have no idea, but the future depends on our finding out. Let me leave you with some traces from history. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, some English workers resisted the introduction of those very pretty machines, as Smith called them, by literally breaking into factories and smashing them. The Luddites, as they were dubbed, struck terror into the industrial bourgeoisie of the 1810s, and the British government became so concerned that they hanged quite a few of the movement's ringleaders. Ever since then, Luddite has been a term of opprobrium hurled at anyone who resists or questions certain kinds of technologies. Progress is inevitable, we're told. You can't stop progress. Whenever someone uses the rhetoric of inevitability, let me translate that for you. Shut up and get with the program, is what you're being told. When someone sighs or blusters about inevitability, they're demanding that you surrender your agency and simply accept what they want for you. Now, am I advocating industrial sabotage? No. But I am invoking the spirit of the Luddites. Progress is not inevitable. It can be contested. Now, the Luddites were joined by romantics, capital R romantics, such as John Ruskin and William Morris, two of the greatest people of the 19th century who you've probably never heard of. But to whom anyone who's ever had a class with me has been introduced. Now, although Ruskin was an art historian, he wrote extensively about economics and technology. Ruskin insisted that the measure of work could not be productivity or profit, but rather how it ministered to making us godlike. Why? Because, as he wrote, the use and function of a human being is to be the witness of the glory of God. The direct manifestation of deity to man is his own image, that is, in man. That's why Ruskin believed that to try to make people 100% precise and accurate and efficient would make them ungodly. Because God isn't precise and accurate and efficient. Anyone who bothers to look at the astonishing abundance of the natural world knows that God is a lavish creator, utterly uninterested in economizing. This is why Ruskin thought that you must either make a tool of the creature or a man of him. You cannot make both. Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. If you do, you must unhumanize them, which would then mean undivinize them. William Morris was a devotee of Ruskin's and a British socialist who is famous for, among other things, Useful Work versus Useless Toil, an essay that should be read and pondered by every single undergraduate. One of our persistent tropes about automation is that as technology develops, we need to adapt people to the technology. Now, this rests on the notion, one that's very dear to the powerful, that technology is some sort of force in and of itself. Morris put forward a different standard. Adapt technology to people, and specifically to the capacity people have for actually taking pleasure in the work they do. The fundamental standard of technology should be, Morris thought, not its productivity or cost effectiveness, but whether or not it contributes to hope and pleasure in labor. Here you see our two kinds of work. One good, the other bad. One not far removed from a blessing, a lightening of life. The other a mere curse, a burden to life. What is the difference between them then? This. One has hope in it, the other has not. What is the nature of the hope, which, when it is present in work, makes it worth doing? It is threefold. Hope of rest, hope of product, hope of pleasure in the work itself. And hope of these also in some abundance and of good quality. Rest enough and good enough to be worth having. Product worth having by one who is neither a fool nor an ascetic. Pleasure enough for all of us to be conscious of it while we are at work. The wages God gets. The wages God gets. If AI or automation gets us God's wages, wonderful. If not, well, then we don't automate. We find some other way to perform the labor. Notice I said we. Whatever technological future we have should be determined by us. And as I said before, the only way workers have ever shaped the future is by struggle, through labor unions, social movements, political parties. The future should be our project, not OpenAI's or Anthropic's or Tesla's. What gives us pleasure and product and rest, not what flatters Altman or Musk or any other financier or technocrat. We can't let the future become a vanity project for Silicon Valley. There's a battle for the future underway at this moment, and AI is one important front in that conflict. All of us here, whether we like it or not, are combatants in that struggle. As if you need reminding, you're facing a profoundly unsettling future, with ecological crisis, economic uncertainty, political upheaval, all at once. And now yet another war. We live in interesting times, as the Chinese adage says. But folks, I wouldn't want to be alive at any other time. so full of promise it is. I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren so far, and believe me, there's nothing like holding your beautiful and vulnerable descendants in your arms to remind you not only of your mortality, but of how wonderful and precious and unjust this world is. AI will never love you. You have to love you and one another, as a famous Galilean once admonished us. Don't let one another become sacrifices to the spirits of Mammon and Mars. I urge you, I plead with you, open your eyes to the world as it is, with all its loveliness and misery and sublimity and corruption. And once you truly open your eyes to that world that is, as Gerard Manley Hopkins knew, charged with the grandeur of God, you'll know that it's worth fighting for. We are as God, so we might as well get good at it.
We're going to do a hard stop at 8:30, as I promised. So we have time for a few questions. We have one in the back up here. Pardon? Yes.
Yes.
Could you stand up? It would make it easier.
Hi.
Thank you.
So it's really easy to laugh when Mark Andreessen says we compared artificial intelligence to alchemy. However, I think that we should actually ask the question, what if that is true? So the question is, for example, with alchemy itself and the alchemical tradition, my current research project is on this. I'm looking into the way that Hegelian philosophy and the Hermetic tradition has recently been into dialogue with theoretical computer science or artificial intelligence by people in recent County. You have lots of people, not just Mark Andreessen, but also very, very influential people in Silicon Valley, engaging with stuff like the velocity of Nicolam, which is like literally summoning demons, and doing alchemical, actual, like self-consciously thinking that we're doing as alchemy in dialogue with an alchemical tradition. And the question we ask, and this is a philosophical question, is that stuff real? Can that be actually interpreted in terms that are not just fantasy? But is there some kind of like meaningful substrate to computer science that is alchemical in character? I'm working on a seminar series with the Abigail Adams Institute in Boston about this. It's going on soon. They have computer connections, but personally, I prefer your work.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would hope, you prefer me to Peter Thiel. I wouldn't want to see his cadaverous visage up on the, geez, I actually don't know where to begin to answer that. I don't think that Mark Andreessen is thinking about this in those terms. I really doubt it very much. I think, have you read this essay of his, to the Techno-Optimist Manifesto? It's online. I mean, it's kind of long, and I think it's written in a kind of breathless, sophomoric kind of prose where, he's hyperventilating, a lot of the time about technology. So I don't know of any of Mark Andreessen's, connections to alchemy or, I do know that Silicon Valley tech bros are interested in a lot of very, how should I put this, arcane stuff. No, I would take your point, though, that alchemy should not be dismissed historically. I mean, certainly because it does lie at the historical roots of much in chemistry and metallurgy and physics. So I wouldn't dismiss that for a second. However, do I think of what they're doing in Silicon Valley as alchemy? No. No, I think it's just straight up, like I said, I think a lot of this is financialization. My view about Sam Altman is that if you look at his career, he is a scam artist, which is why he is often referred to as Scam Altman by people who have worked with him. So,
here in the front.
You choose. Yes.
So you said earlier that there is no like first, second, third industrial revolution, that
Yeah.
there's only one.
Yeah.
So do you foresee an end to this industrial revolution, and does it involve AI?
Well, AI is here to stay. I mean, in some form. I mean, it's not. What I'm trying to argue here is that it's the form it should take that we need to discuss as not just as a bunch of engineers, but as a society. So no, I mean, I don't think. I really don't know. I mean, I don't. If you're asking if I foresee an end to this revolution, no. That doesn't mean there won't be one. It doesn't mean that that revolution will take forms that, in another 100 years, we will not recognize, So no, I don't see an end. I don't foresee an end to it, because I think that this technological revolution is a part of what makes modernity, right? And modernity is about, at least, whether you're religious or secular, it's about the idea that we are indeed capable of changing things in the world, and thinking about that agency in new ways. So yeah, I think that horse has left the barn as far as technological revolution goes. The question is who's going to shape it, to me.
I think we got room, we got one more.
Let's take a few more. We got the room.
I'll see you on Thursday in class, but
Yes.
I know you referred to a different type of AI if it was stripped from the Silicon elites.
Yes.
But do you think there's any way that automation exists at the same time as human flourishing?
Sure.
Or do you think it's all just a crap?
No. I think there are some kinds of. William Morris thought that there were forms of automation that were praiseworthy. But you see, the thing is, what has to be determined about automation and about the technology is, does it make us better off? We should decide that, not a bunch of tech bros, right? That's my point about automation. I don't think automation should be completely eliminated. I mean, it's any dangerous or tedious or toilsome job, yeah, sure, robotize it. I don't have a problem with that. But we should decide that. A lot of the history of technology over the last 200 years, nobody has ever been consulted about any of this, right? And AI is, I think, a really big example of that. We didn't ask to have machines humanized. I didn't ask for Claude to blackmail people. Why would you do that? Right? That's why I think that if we do that, there is something wrong with us. If the impulse to do that and to accept it, just lying down.
Maybe one more. One more. You pick.
Thank you again for the lecture, Dr. McCarraher. I wanted to say, because I think there's a great danger, myself included, to go forth from this lecture and just graduate. I'm a senior, graduate, take a job, not really think about these things, kind of live life and go through the motions. How can this is a bit of a broad question, how can we take this knowledge and be witnesses of Christ in the world, including in the economic and the sphere and the workplace, in such a way that we can help to, influence the way these systems are being built, or how wealth is distributed, how we can make sure everyone, is respected and loved in the image and likeness of God.
Well, as I said, I mean, you work somewhere, form a union. Form a union. I am not kidding. I mean, I think that this point really needs to be emphasized. Your generation does not know how powerful unions can be, and how powerful they once were. And how did they get that power? They struck. They sat down in factories. They made trouble. That's my answer. You've got to make trouble. And you know, you do the same thing through political parties. You know, these clowns in the current Congress, okay, you're not going to get anything out of them. You're not going to get anything out of the Democrats either. Okay? So that's why you need to go outside. That's why you have social movements. Right? I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. Your generation is not used to hearing this. You better get used to hearing this. Because it's the only way, that you're going to change this. It's not going to come through individual actions. It's just not. Right? It has to be collective.
I think that's the note we promised.
Thank you.